Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thanks for stopping by again. First, I'd like to mention why I've chosen the title I have for this video. Are you a pioneer? It goes back a decade, maybe a little more. I was traveling up the coast of Panama, west of the city, to join a group of expats who were getting together up there for dinner and conversation. And there were quite a good group of us, and we ended up breaking into tables, and my table probably had a dozen people. And several of the folks knew I had lived and worked overseas my whole adult life, basically. And they asked me if things were different now, and if expats were different, and so forth. And did I see any when I was in my early years overseas, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so forth. And I explained to them that there was nothing new about relocation. And I reminded them of Marco Polo. Everybody knows Marco Polo, and I think they have the impression maybe that he went off to China for a year journey, because it was tough back then, and then he traded or he bought silk, one thing or another, and brought it back to Venice and made a fortune. Well, Marco Polo was not a traveling salesman. He was much, much more than that. That journey he took, that he made so very famous when he wrote it up, took 24 years, the bulk of which he spent living and working in China. He was a relocator. He could have come back much earlier, but he didn't. He stayed there and really became familiar with the local situation. And when he wrote it up, it became an instant hit in Europe. And now, centuries later, we still remember him. But he was not the first of his kind by a long shot. And he was there in the late 1200s. So we are talking a very, very long period of human history where travel to other nations and other parts of the world was not unknown. It did occur. Now, in more recent centuries and during our lifetimes, it has been true, I told them, that the upper class often had residences overseas, sometimes vacation homes, sometimes more than that. And they had their children educated in Switzerland or one thing or another. There was that kind of movement, particularly between North America and Europe, for example, and elsewhere, that was very common. They could afford it. It was very expensive to do it. It was a different world. It was harder to get visas. There was a whole series of reasons why people just did not do that, other than these very wealthy. Then there are, of course, the lower class, the poorer people, the working class people who just couldn't make ends meet where they were, or if they could find a job at all. And they had been moving wherever they had been able to move for many, many centuries, and long before Marco Polo, in order to find a better life for themselves and for their families. So what was different today, and what I was experiencing when I was with them in Panama, was the arrival of so many people in the middle class. They were the least likely throughout my life to be found living, not visiting, but living outside their home nations. I did meet them. I certainly met some. They're some of the most colorful people I've ever met. There are many an interesting story related to them, but they were very unusual people. And often it was something they were getting away from that had led them to do this. But interestingly enough, they had made that adjustment under much more difficult circumstances than we can expect to face, or you can expect to face here or anywhere else. Interesting people, but few and far between. Starting in the 1990s, things began to change, and now here I was with a group of wonderful people who neither were poor and looking for employment or something to feed their families, but who weren't rich and just down because this was their vacation home. They were indeed from the middle class, and that was a fantastic step forward, because now people who had been denied the benefits of relocation overseas, either because they couldn't afford it or because it just didn't fit their view of the world, or something just out of the question for them. Now they could do this freely if they chose to, and here they were choosing to do it. There was one gentleman who, when I was talking, was staring down at the table. And I noticed him out of the corner of my eye, but I didn't think very much about it. So what? It's his business. And when I was finished, the rest of the table was ready to roll with further conversation, at that very moment he looked up and he looked me directly in the eye and he said, "Do you mean we're not pioneers?" And I was startled by that. I hadn't expected that. And so my reaction was, well, no, we're not really pioneers. As I say, this has been going on for a very, very long time. But as you're part of this group of middle-class people who are now choosing to relocate overseas, you might say the part of the first wave of these people who are now showing up all over the world. Well, he looked disappointed, but it was all over with. The conversation went on. Somebody else started talking about something else, and we went on and had a very, very nice evening. Later on, when I got home, I sat and thought about this man, because his look of disappointment had really affected me. And I realized I had not really answered his question properly. Now that I had a chance to think about it, I realized it would have been more appropriate for me to respond by saying, no, you're not a pioneer in the sense of doing something that no one else has done before, or very, very few people. You're doing something that has been done for hundreds of years and by many people before you, but you are a pioneer in your own life. And that's really what it boils down to. And I'm an American, so I know, as so many people all over the world know, about the people in the eastern U.S. who got in those wagon trains and spent weeks crossing the U.S. to get to a place like Wyoming or Colorado or Utah or wherever, and undertaking a great journey with great risks involved. But they were pioneers. We talk about them as pioneers, but in fact, I think if we had sat and talked with these families and these individuals who did it, we would have found that they weren't a movement. They weren't trying to be pioneers. They were in search of something better that they couldn't find at home. And if you were to talk to them later, you would have heard the difficulties, the challenges they faced, far greater than any we're ever likely to face. How they had overcome them, how they had adapted to their new environment, how it wasn't exactly what they expected when they set out, but it's okay. They had dealt with it, and they had their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so forth following them there. They had settled in, and they were now part of their communities. They pioneered in their lives. I often say, when I speak to larger groups in some of the publications where I've written, that the decision to relocate overseas is being made by millions of people in North America, in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, and everywhere, Africa and so forth. And these are not just people are not part of a movement. They have no leader. They do what they do because the individual or the family has made the decision this is something they want to do, they're seeking something, and they are going to pack up and move and live in a completely different country. It's as exciting for them as it was for somebody who got on a wagon train and went to Wyoming 200 years ago. So that's the key factor here. And that's why I should have said to him, no, you're not a pioneer. Yes, you are a pioneer. Both. And that's really, really important to understand. It doesn't make any difference how many people have done this before, how many thousands or tens of thousands of expats there may be in Panama at the moment. None of that really should mean anything to you. What does really mean something to you is that you yourself in your life are looking for something different. Panama is one of the places you're looking at. You're giving it consideration as a place to go and live. It's very different from a place to go and visit as a tourist. You are pioneers. You're pioneers in your own life. And I believe that if you take that attitude and you take some of the spirit those people had when they set off for Wyoming, or people all over the world, or Marco Polo 600-700 years ago, then you would understand that they too were doing the same thing, looking for something better. And you have something in common with each of them. And you are all connected through all these centuries of history that actually go back thousands of years. You are a special group. You're not the average, the ordinary. Someday, maybe. Someday in years to come. But for the moment, those of us who do relocate, while we may number in the millions, and we do tens of millions actually, if you take into account people are doing this from many different nations, not just from North America and Europe, and that's true right here in Panama, where we have so many Latin Americans who've moved here. You are you're part of something bigger than yourself, but you are nonetheless pioneering. And if you move into that, and if you choose to come to Panama, or if you go somewhere else, I don't care. It's your business entirely. Keep that in mind. I'm a pioneer. I'm going to have to adapt. I'm going to find difficulties. I'm going to find challenges. I'm going to find that things aren't exactly the way I thought they were going to be when I set out. And this is invariably the case. As I've often said, people here 48 hours and they've already changed their minds as to what they want to see, where they want to go. Their expectations they aren't disappointed. They just suddenly realize there's a lot more here than they had thought or that they'd read about on the internet. It's the real thing. And once they're here, they adapt to that. And that's what you're going to be doing too. If you're going to be successful, I'd say this, you do want to be a pioneer. You do want to understand that need, that desire to do something very different with your life, to make it a better life, and recognize that just like the pioneers that have come before you, you have to put the effort in to make that happen. If you do, then you're a pioneer with a purpose and with a very good chance of success. If you think it's something less, more like a long-term tourist, well, that's your business. But it's not the same thing. You're not really a pioneer. I hope you're pioneers. If that's what interests you, is living in another country, then by all means, be pioneers, be proud of it, and make that connection. Maybe not with the people in your neighborhood or the people at work or what have you who may think you're crazy. Who knows? And there are always people who say, no, don't do that. But the truth of the matter is, those aren't your real connections in this case. Your real connections are with people from all over the world who are doing exactly what you're doing. And they are, and you, are pioneers. Even though there's no movement, there's no leader, there's nothing else, they're here. They're scattered all over the country. They're everywhere. And you'll meet them. And I hope you'll enjoy them as I have enjoyed expats all the years I've met them overseas, and particularly now when there's so many. And you can fit in and be successful pioneers. And that really, in the final analysis, is what it's all about. Making it successful for yourself. I know you can do it if you really want to do it. And if you choose to do it here, fine. If it's somewhere else, that's great. But do it. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you again.